Welcome to Nice and Blunt. I'm Adam Riancho, and these are my running back rankings for Week 12 in fantasy football. I'm intended for half PPR on this channel, but before we get going, there are 6 teams on bye, and I have to mention all the players I didn't rank due to bye and injury. Bijan Robinson, Tyler Algier of the Falcons, Alvin Kamara of the Saints, Chase Brown of the Bengals, Breece Hall and Braylon Allen of the Jets, along with James Cook, Ray Davis of the Bills, and lastly Travis Etienne and Tank Bigsby of the Jaguars. So 5 of those players are must starts every week, and that's definitely impacting the position. So those players are unranked. There's also some players out due to injury. Zach Moss is on IR, so is Kendry Miller. Jamal Williams has been out for a while, didn't rank him. Marshawn Lloyd is coming off of IR, but apparently he's doubtful at the moment, not expecting him to suit up on Sunday. Neither is Miles Sanders, also doubtful against the Chiefs, but Jonathan Brooks is ranked, and I also did rank Isiah Pacheco optimistically. While he's still on IR at the moment, his practice window was opened, and they sound a bit optimistic about his chances in Week 12. So I did rank Pacheco, but obviously if he doesn't play, expect Kareem Hunt to slide into his spot if we get more clarity on Saturday that Pacheco's unavailable. So those are all the players inactive. And before I get going, I want to show you a couple graphs.
Look at this graph.
At running back, there is a massive tier break. The top 4 are elite players, and they're obviously must starts. Those players in order of points per game scored over the last 4 would be Joe Mixon at number 1 with 22.1, followed by Saquon Barkley with 21 points, followed by DeVon Achane at 19.5, and Josh Jacobs at RB4 with 19. But a bit of a shocker was running back 5. While there are 3 players who rank between Jacobs and this player that are unavailable this week due to bye, this is all of the running backs available this week. So clearly a drop-off. And number 5 is probably going to shock you. It's Rachaad White of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, averaging 16.6 points over his last 4. So the fact that Mike Evans and Chris Godwin have been out is a big reason why, but kind of a shocker. It's kind of like there's 3 different tiers once we hit this point. 16 to 15 and a half is all a different tier. 15 to like 13 points is another tier as well. And then from 12.6 down to like 11.3 is the bottom tier. I think that's kind of like the cutoff point. Once we hit running back 27 at 10.6, I think there's a very obvious clear drop off as it trickles down from that point. So you definitely want to be starting the top 20. And based on matchups, you may not have much of a choice. So let's get going with. There's one other graph I did want to show you before we get going. These are the matchups in terms of how many points each defense allows every week. And at the end of it, you can see this data point of 20.5 points per game. That represents league average. So if it's over 20 points, I'm not worried at all. And I think only until you hit like 22 and a half points does it start to get interesting. But 3 of those top 10 matchups are missing. The Jags are number 1. They just faced Detroit, so that's why it's so high. But we're also missing the Falcons, who are like number 8, and the Saints, who are roughly number 10. So that's unfortunate. Those are the red dots in this graph. And then as we trickle down below league average, we're also missing the Jets right at the middle, the Bills right below average, and then the only bad matchup we're missing this week would be the Bengals. So in general, it's not a great week for running backs. If you have one of those great matchups, be happy about it. And if not, you're probably going to get somewhere between 12 to 16 points, most likely, from your starting running backs. That's what they're most of the time averaging in general. So let's get going. Just wanted to show you those graphs because I put all of the work in to get them. I got all the data compiled. I might as well show you for once. So here we go. At number 1, I mentioned this player was the running back 1 in scoring the last 4 games. It's Joe Mixon, who's clearly a must start. There's no way you're benching him. And right behind him, I have Saquon Barkley, who was the RB2. And they were neck and neck. The reason I have Mixon ranked higher is not just because of his averages lately. He also gets the far better matchup this week. The Titans ranked top 7. They allow 22.7 points per game on only 85 yards per game. That's not good. 3.8 yards per carry, a little concerning. 18 receiving yards per game is also well below league average. It's about 30 receiving yards per game that most defenses do give up every week. But where I trust Mixon by far and away is in the touchdown department. He scored 6 over his last 4 games, and the Titans allowed 9 touchdowns to running backs the last 5 games. So he's definitely finding the end zone. I think you can almost project 2 touchdowns for Mixon this week. That's what he did last week against Dallas, and Mixon will dominate. Saquon gets a bottom 3 matchup, however, and the Rams are on the opposite side of the spectrum. They have not given up a single running back touchdown over their last 5 games. So very tough matchup here. Only 3.3 yards per carry allowed, 77 yards per game on the ground, and 40 through the air. So I do expect Saquon to be fine in the passing game. There is a chance that Jalen Hurts, though, vultures his touchdowns, but Saquon's averaging 147 yards per game. He's a potential league MVP this season. There's no way you're benching Saquon. So those are the top 2, Mixon and Saquon. At number 3, I believe James Conner will dominate this week. That's what he's done historically against the Seahawks. As long as he's with the Cardinals, he plays lights out against Seattle. His last 4 games in his career, an average of 20 fantasy points per game on 22.5 touches, 5 catches per game, 115 yards, and 4 touchdowns. If we look at last year, week 18, with this coaching staff, with Kyler Murray healthy, James Conner went over 200 yards from scrimmage. He also scored a touchdown. He was elite in week 18. So expect more of the same. I think he'll absolutely blow up. And he's actually been a top 10 running back the last 4 games, averaging 15.8. That ranks as RB9 of all the running backs available this week in your lineup. So definitely trust him. Only 2 touchdowns in this sample size, but 113 yards per game. He usually dominates Seattle. So it'll happen again. James Conner, a must start. True alpha this week, a top 3 running back, in my opinion. At number 4, I mentioned Josh Jacobs was in that Elite 4 on that first graph, and I do rank him here at number 4. Just like James Conner, 20 touches, 3 catches, 115 yards per game. You're getting the same floor from both Conner and Jacobs, but Jacobs has actually been more reliable in the end zone with 4 touchdowns over his last 4 games. He has been safer in fantasy. So 19 points per game, you cannot bench Josh Jacobs. He is a stud at the moment. And while San Fran only allows 3.3 yards per carry, it's not the best matchup possible. They also give up 6 rushing touchdowns over their last 5 games. So Jacobs will be fine. I definitely trust him to score a touchdown. He had 130 yards last week and a touchdown against Chicago. Number 5, I'm going with Jahmyr Gibbs at the Colts, who is never a player you're benching. He ranks right behind Rachaad White as RB6 over the last 4 games, averaging 16.1 points per game his last 4. 14.3 touches, 1.3 catch, 110 yards. He doesn't need a lot of volume to go off. So if he gets 15 touches this week, he probably goes over 150 yards. They're going to dominate the Colts. This Lions offense is just a nightmare to stop. And if you have any Lions in your roster, you cannot bench him at this point. So definitely start Jahmyr Gibbs. He has been averaging 2 points per game more than David Montgomery the last month. And last week, Montgomery scored 2 touchdowns. So if anything, it's going to pivot back in favor of Gibbs. This week, Gibbs will dominate. At number 6 is where I have Rachaad White, who I mentioned was a top 5 running back in terms of scoring the last 4 games. 16.6 on the back of 5 catches per game, only 12.3 touches, but 71 yards and 5 touchdowns. He also fumbled in this stretch, and he's averaging more points than Jahmyr Gibbs. So you can't bench Rachaad. Maybe Mike Evans does return to the lineup, but with Chris Godwin out, I still expect a ton of targets for Rachaad. He's a true stud. The Giants are also a top 5 matchup. That's why I've upgraded him even more. The Giants give up 24 points per game on 149 yards per game, 5.1 yards per carry, along with 4 touchdowns. Rachaad will be fine. And the fact that they use him in the passing game, it's part of their run game. I absolutely trust him. He should give you about 75 yards and a touchdown this week. Him and Bucky Irving are contributing at a similar level, but Rachaad is a lot more reliable in the red zone. So love his touchdown odds. I definitely trust the floor. Rachaad is a must start this week. And maybe you think this rank is a little too low, given I mentioned he was in that top 3 players in terms of scoring, but DeVon Achane does get one of the tougher matchups this week. It does rank bottom 10. The Patriots only give up 17.9 points per game, 116 rushing yards per game on 4.3 yards per carry. That's not bad, but where they excel is limiting receiving yards to running backs. League average is about 30 yards per game. The Patriots only give up 17. So maybe it's irrelevant. We know DeVon Achane is a stud in the passing game, and I'm not really worried about it at all. But in general, I think his odds to score are a little bit lower. The Patriots have only given up 3 running back touchdowns the last 5 weeks. So that's my only concern why he's in the lower end of this tier. But at number 7, given he's a top 3 running back in scoring the last 4 weeks, you have to start him. There's no way you're benching DeVon Achane. He should be fine. But this is a divisional game, and I always give you divisional stats most of the time. There are none for DeVon Achane. He has 3 games against the Patriots in his career. His first, he played on 10% of snaps. He had 2 touches, 9 yards. The second game, he didn't play at all. And then the third game this season, he only played on 14% of snaps. He had 4 touches, 17 yards. So he does average 4.5 yards per touch against the Patriots. Otherwise, I can't tell you anything. We have no stats to go off of. So matchup's not great, but Achane's been a stud lately. You're definitely starting him at RB7. No one can bench DeVon Achane. At number 8, I have Derrick Henry at the Chargers, who's one of the best running backs this season. You probably think this rank is a bit too low, but when I've ranked Derrick Henry this low, like 2 weeks ago, he did not quite pay off. I was correct to do that. And the matchup was terrible in that situation. This week, it's really bad again. The Chargers are a bottom 4 matchup, and they only give up 14.9 points per game on 90 rushing yards, along with 37 receiving yards. But we know that Derrick Henry doesn't really catch many passes this season. So the receiving stats are irrelevant. He is reliant on touchdowns, and the Chargers have not given up a single running back touchdown in the last 5 games. Although you can run for 4.7 yards per carry on them, on the season, only 2 running backs have scored on them, and that is Samaje Perine and Alexander Mattison. This season, you can't find the end zone if you're a running back facing the Chargers. So that's my concern. It's Derrick Henry, who has like 15 touchdowns already on the year. So I'm not going to panic. I do expect him to still score a touchdown, but I don't think he'll have his best game of the season. He hasn't been like as much of a stud lately. He's actually only the RB7 over the last 4 games, averaging 16 points per game, thanks to 5 touchdowns, 87 yards. He is still a top 10 player, but I don't have him in the top 5 this week. I wouldn't rank him there, given the matchup is bottom 4. Number 9, I'm still starting Kenneth Walker, guaranteed. Versus Arizona, Walker does play very well. In his last 4 games versus the Cardinals, 16.3 points per game on average. A huge workload, 25.3 touches, 2 catches, 108 yards per game, and 3 touchdowns. But those stats are all with Pete Carroll as coach. Maybe it'll be different with Ryan Grubb calling plays. But this season, Kenneth Walker catches a lot more receptions in the passing game. And that is what Arizona can get burned by. While they're an average matchup overall, they allow one of the highest amounts of yards to the running back position. 6.4 catches per game for 50 receiving yards per game. League average is roughly 30. So love this spot for Walker. His target share has been dominant this season, and I expect at least like 4 catches for Walker, probably along with 40 yards in the passing game. So his floor is going to be great. He also plays very well against Seattle, and I trust him. I think he will find the end zone. Love Kenneth Walker this week. I think he's a big reason why the Seahawks win. At number 10, it's a tentative ranking. Obviously, if he doesn't suit up, he hasn't played since week 2. Do not start Pacheco. We'll know for sure on Sunday. But if he starts, you have to play him. Pacheco gets the best matchup this week. The Panthers on the season are number 1, but because the Jags just jumped them last week, they rank number 2 over the last 5 games. They allow 28.6 points per game, 151 rushing yards per game on 5.1 yards per carry, along with 7 touchdowns to opposing running backs. So Pacheco's going to dominate. I think he goes over 100 yards easily if active, and I really don't think he's going to need 20 plus touches in order to do it. So love this matchup as long as he's healthy. You've been waiting for him. As someone who has him in the subscriber league and is desperate to get him back, I will be starting Pacheco if active. So love this matchup. It's definitely the spot to chase. And when he was active earlier in the season before he got hurt, he was averaging 14.2 points per game, 95 yards per game, 3.5 catches, 1 touchdown in those 2 games. That was RB12 based on scoring. So love Pacheco. I'm just waiting for him to get back, and his ceiling is league winning. We've seen what Kareem Hunt can do. Pacheco is way more talented. So Pacheco could literally be a top 4 running back rest of season. I think if you've been waiting, you have to start him. If he's healthy, let's hope they activate him off IR before Sunday. Number 11, you're also starting Christian McCaffrey no matter what, but a little concerning given the fact he has not yet found the end zone. That was guaranteed for him in his career, especially with the Niners. It was a guarantee almost every week. So the fact that it's 2 games now without a touchdown, a little strange. Their offensive line also a bit banged up. If Trent Williams remains questionable, I would be a little concerned if he doesn't play. But assuming he does, you can't bench McCaffrey. You drafted him first overall. You've been waiting this long to start him. And over the last 2 games, his volume is still there. 21 touches, 5 catches per game, 107 yards, just no touchdowns. So the floor is guaranteed. You'll get 13 points. That's what he's giving you the last 2 games. And if he does score a touchdown, you'll probably go over 20. So ranked him at number 11, but against the Packers, it's not great. But the Packers have given up 5 rushing touchdowns the last 5 weeks. Odds are McCaffrey finds the end zone. But I'm a bit worried about their team in general. Something's wrong, and the Packers will play tough. I could see him not score a touchdown again. So I'm a bit concerned about it. I absolutely trust Pacheco to find the end zone, and that's why I do rank McCaffrey behind Isiah Pacheco. I think everyone I rank above him is a bit more likely to find pay dirt. That's why he's only RB11. Number 12, I have J.K. Dobbins versus Baltimore, who against the Ravens isn't like the best matchup ever, but lately it has ranked top 12. They give up 80 yards per game on the ground, 3.6 yards per carry, 4 touchdowns, but a lot of usage in the passing game. A league high 6.8 receptions per game to running backs, along with 60 receiving yards per game, and 2 of their 4 touchdowns the last 5 games have also come in the passing department. So Dobbins is definitely the guy who catches all of the targets in this backfield. There's nobody else really that does that. We rarely see Herbert check it down to the running back position. So maybe they switch up their game plan. It's going to be an interesting matchup. I can't quite decide if it's a lot of defense in this game or a ton of offense. The Ravens secondary is trash. So I do think Dobbins will be fine. He was great last week with 2 touchdowns, and he's a top 10 running back over the last 4 games, averaging 15.9 points with 5 touchdowns. Is elite. So I trust the floor. You're just hoping for a touchdown. The Ravens probably let it happen. If he does catch 6 receptions, then Dobbins will be lights out. So definitely trusting him. He's playing for his next contract, and as long as he's healthy, the Chargers make him look so good behind that offensive line. I love J.K. Dobbins. He's been the story for the Chargers this year. Without him, I'm not quite sure they are the same team. So love him. Absolutely going to start him. Definitely continue to trust J.K. Dobbins. At 13, I have Jonathan Taylor versus Detroit, and I would have probably ranked him top 10 if not for this matchup. The Lions are one of the worst you can find. They allow only 17 points per game, 89 yards per game on 4.4 yards per carry, and 3 touchdowns. We also know that Anthony Richardson is a major threat on the goal line to vulture those touchdowns, so that is my concern. Taylor has fallen to running back 24 over the last 5 games, only averaging 11.3 points per game. And there are 5 players on bye that would qualify above him. So technically, he's barely a top 30 player. So that's not good. The volume's there, 21.3 touches, 1.8 catch, 90 yards is fine, but it's just a safe floor. Only 1 touchdown his last 4 games. So at some point, it will rectify itself. He will get back in the end zone, but I do worry about it a little bit. Richardson will continue to vulture him several times rest of season. So that was the concern drafting Taylor entering the season. How many touchdowns would he actually put up knowing Richardson is also a goal line running back? So kind of concerning, but the floor is very safe. I'm definitely not benching Taylor just because I'm worried about the touchdown. Similar to McCaffrey, I expect 11 to 13 points as a floor from Taylor every week. Number 14, I have Kyren Williams versus Philadelphia. And similar to Taylor, he's not been great. The running back 23 over the last 4 games, only because of 1 touchdown, along with a fumble, but the volume is there. 21.5 touches, 2.8 catches, 95 yards per game. He's just as safe in terms of floor as Taylor, but he gets a terrible matchup. It ranks bottom 2. The Eagles are elite on the ground, only giving up less than 14 points, 13.9 on average for 58 yards per game, 3.6 yards per carry, only 2 running back touchdowns the last 5 games. So it's Kyren Williams. You know for a fact you're starting him, but if you have been starting him lately, you know the risk involved. He had 86 yards last week and nothing in the passing game, no touchdowns either. That's the risk with Kyren, but that's just part of the equation. There's always running backs that just kind of fail to go over 10 points sometimes, and the usage will come back to him. Inevitably, he'll get back in the end zone. So it's the Rams offense. I wouldn't worry about it. It's a bit of a must win, but it's such a terrible matchup. I'd be worried. I think they score more in the passing game than in the run game. But you're definitely still starting Kyren Williams. I can't bench him. This is as low as I can go. The matchup, though, does scare me. At 15, I have Chuba Hubbard versus the Chiefs, and other than the Eagles, this is the other worst matchup possible. It does rank worst in the NFL dating back to week 1. They only give up 13.1 points per game to opposing running backs on 52 yards per game on the ground, 3.2 yards per carry, 3 touchdowns, and 20 receiving yards. If not for 2 touchdowns last week from James Cook, he would have been terrible. Very few yards from scrimmage from Cook last week. And that's what you're hoping for Hubbard. He needs the touchdown because I'm really worried about his efficiency against the best run defense in the NFL. There's also the variable of Jonathan Brooks getting back into the offense, but with Miles Sanders doubtful, I really don't see that impacting Hubbard's volume very much. We saw him sign a contract extension right before their bye week, and although he did have a injury late in that Germany game, he did pop back up. He did get back on the field very quickly, so I'm not too worried about it. Off the bye, he should be well rested and good to go. So he's been a great, definitely deserving of that contract. The RB10 over his last 4 games, averaging 15.6 points per game. So similar to Taylor and Kyren, the volume is just too elite. 21 touches, basically 2 catches, 91 yards. And with 4 touchdowns, you actually don't have the concerns I mentioned on the goal line for guys like Taylor or Kyren Williams, even McCaffrey ranked above him. But the matchup is just so bad, and because Brooks is entering the equation, maybe Brooks does vulture him, given it's his first NFL game. They might want to give him one of their few touchdowns that this offense will provide. So I'm still starting Chuba Hubbard. I'm not going to panic at all, but given the matchup, I am concerned he's not a top 10 play. Number 16, I have Dave Montgomery at the Colts, and given my concerns about the matchup for Chuba and Kyren, you'd probably expect Montgomery to be ranked higher after scoring 2 touchdowns last week. But without those 2 touchdowns, his production has not quite been the same. It has definitely favored Jahmyr Gibbs in general the last month. So I am a little bit hesitant to rank Montgomery in the top 15. I want to see it one more time. Without the touchdowns, I doubt you're going to go over 12 or 13 points. He rarely gives you more than 70 yards. That's his average over the last 4 games. And last week he did have 95, but you're not going to face the Jaguars every week. The Colts are a pretty league average matchup. And I also think the likelihood of it pivoting back to Gibbs on the goal line is very high. That's kind of just how this offense goes. Montgomery gets one, then Gibbs gets one. And if one of them has more any given game, then it balances itself out and it favors the other player the week after. So I do rank Jahmyr Gibbs 11 spots higher. Montgomery is definitely a player I'm starting. I trust the floor for sure, but I do not think he's better than Chuba, even though Hubbard has a terrible matchup. Number 17, I have Brian Robinson Jr. versus Dallas, who is not fully healthy, but he was playing last week. He gets extra time to rest. It was a Thursday game, and he also scored a touchdown against one of the toughest defenses in the NFL. The Eagles are no joke, so that was very impressive from B-Rob, and that's what he always does. He has a very high touchdown likelihood every single week. It's almost guaranteed from Brian Robinson. So while Austin Ekeler has really stepped up in this offense, they have very different roles. Brian Robinson is clearly the goal line running back, and against Dallas, I think he'll dominate. The Cowboys are a top 3 matchup here, allowing 26.7 points per game, 125 rushing yards on 4.8 yards per carry, along with 7 touchdowns to running backs the last 5 games. And they look like they've quit. They were so frustrated, so many penalties last week. They are ass. So no concern at all with this matchup. It's definitely a massive upgrade, and I do think Brian Robinson will return to the end zone. He might not get more than like 13, 14 touches, but he probably gives you 60 yards at least, along with the touchdown. And I do trust B-Rob for at least 12 points. I do think that is a safe projection for him against Dallas. If anything, that might be his floor in such a good matchup. But I do worry about the role for Ekeler. It's a bit more of a 50-50 split at the moment. Ekeler catches all the passes. Number 18, I have Tyrone Tracy versus Tampa Bay, who I might be ranking a bit too low because, like Brian Robinson, he gets a top 4 elite matchup. The Buccaneers, over the last 5 games, allowed 24.5 points per game to running backs, and that is a very elite number, along with 98 yards per game, 4.5 yards per carry, 6 touchdowns, 5.6 receptions per game, and 47 receiving yards per game. I really trust the efficiency for Tyrone Tracy. I think this will be an interesting game with Tommy Cutlets under center. Singletary is not a big threat anymore, so absolutely love this role for Tracy. Off the bye, I think it could even increase, and I really trust his production. Just like Brian Robinson, he's giving you 12.3 points per game. He's a little less touchdown dependent, and I think he contributes a lot in the passing game. I think he will go over 100 yards. So that touchdown is the only toss-up here. I think B-Rob is a bit safer to get it, and that's why I rank him one spot higher. But Tracy, I think, is a must-start. At number 18, I think he's a stud this week. At number 19, I have Najee Harris at Cleveland, and the Browns allow 5 yards per carry and 6 rushing touchdowns the last 5 games, but only 22 receiving yards per game, definitely below average in that department. However, Najee in his last 5 games versus the Browns is pretty efficient, an average of 20 touches, 1.8 catch, 87 yards per game, and 3 touchdowns, but he's also fumbled twice. So if you remove the fumble, you're getting about 13.5 points, but if he fumbles again, you're going to be pissed. But still, I really trust the floor. Najee should be fine in this divisional game on Thursday. I think they'll give him plenty of work. That's what he's seen the last 4 games, an average of 21.5 touches per game, and Jaylen Warren has been healthy in that sample size. So you know his role is secure. While he doesn't catch many passes, less than 2 per game, 95 yards is his floor with 2 touchdowns. He is the safer bet between him and Warren to score a touchdown. So I do trust Najee a lot. Very high usage, high floor every week. And if you do get a touchdown, you'll be ecstatic. You will go over 15 points. So trust Najee for sure. Definitely starting him against Cleveland. At number 20, I think I'm going to start Aaron Jones at Chicago, but I will admit I'm very concerned about it. Based on last week's usage, I'm not convinced he's healthy because he exited the game 2 weeks ago. He was only limited in practice all week, and Cam Akers did get a sizable role. He also scored the touchdown, vultured it from Aaron Jones. So if you get more of a 50-50 split between Jones and Akers, I'd be very concerned. This ranking might be way too high, but given the injury, I think maybe they were saving him a little bit for this game. The divisional game against Chicago is way more important than a likely blowout win over Tennessee. Maybe it wasn't a blowout, but they did win comfortably, and I do think that was part of the reason why Aaron Jones wasn't as much of a workhorse against the Titans. But against Chicago, I don't think he needs a workhorse role to pay off. He has dominated Chicago in his career. Obviously, all of these stats are with the Packers I'm about to show you, but in Aaron Jones' last 5 games versus the Bears, he averages 20.1 points per game on 15.6 touches per game, 3.6 catches, 111 yards, and 6 total touchdowns. He always scores on the Bears. He owns them every single time. So he's played even better than James Conner against the Cardinals, and I rank Conner number 3 this week. So even though Jones sucked in week 11, I have to rank him as a player to start. These numbers against the Bears are dynamic and just fantastic. So while there is an asterisk, it was with a different franchise altogether. I still believe that Aaron Jones' talent didn't go anywhere. The only concern is his injury risk and the fact that Akers could vulture him. So because it's a bit more of a timeshare, I have him in the same range as guys like Najee Harris and Brian Robinson, and there is some risk involved. I understand if you'd rather bench him just because last week scared the shit out of you. Akers scoring was very concerning. Aaron Jones has no touchdowns the last 4 weeks. If they're going to give a touchdown to anyone, why are they giving it to Akers? So Kevin O'Connell has this weird fixation with Akers. He loves him, and every other coach seems to despise him. So for some reason, it works out. And until we know for sure that Akers is gone, I just can't rank Aaron Jones where I want to. If I knew that Aaron Jones was healthy and Akers wasn't there, I'd probably rank Jones top 10. I think I'd rather have Jones than Pacheco, given it's the Bears matchup. But I really worry about his volume this week, and that is why I only have him at number 20. But the Bears do give up 117 rushing yards on 4.6 yards per carry the last 5 weeks, so I think he will be efficient. It's just a question of will he find the end zone. That has not happened at all lately. He's only the RB 27 over the last 4 games. If you want to bench him, I understand he's only averaging 9.2 points per game. But this week, I think he will go over 100 yards. I think he will pay off and score a touchdown like he normally does versus Chicago. Number 21, I have Bucky Irving at the Giants. And interestingly, he gets almost the same amount of volume as Rachaad White. They both see about 13 touches per game. Bucky is also catching 4 receptions per game, but with only 2 touchdowns, that's less than half of what Rachaad is putting up. That's what puts him in a different tier altogether. I do trust Rachaad White a lot more to score on the goal line. So that's why Bucky is in a different tier. He's more of a flex play. I do trust Rachaad a bit more based on his role in the passing game. But maybe you disagree with me. Maybe you think they should be ranked back to back. The volume is not that much different. Rachaad is actually seeing slightly fewer touches, less than 1 per game than Bucky. So you could definitely make the argument I am too low on Bucky. Their yardage is also pretty similar, but I do trust Rachaad for that touchdown. Irving, a bit less. So at RB21, that's basically what he's been averaging. He gives you 12.1 points the last 4 weeks, and that does rank his running back 22 in points per game. So I would start him. He's a bit more of a flex play because the touchdown is more likely to go to Rachaad. At number 22, I have Rhamondre Stevenson at Miami, and I might be ranking him way too low, but I just still don't trust him. While he has scored 4 touchdowns the last 4 games, for some reason I just can't quite get behind Rhamondre as a safe player. But he's averaging 14.8 points, 20.8 touches, 3.3 catches, 71 yards, and 4 touchdowns. That's RB11 over the last 5 games. So I could literally make an argument that you should be starting Rhamondre Stevenson over players like Jonathan Taylor, Kyren Williams, and even Christian McCaffrey right now. But obviously that sounds insane. And this matchup is bottom 10, so I think it does dry up. I don't think Rhamondre will be elite this week. The Dolphins only allow 18 points per game on 67 rushing yards, 3.8 yards per carry, 4 touchdowns, but also a pretty above average 43 receiving yards per game to the position. So I do trust him in the passing game. I think he will do some damage this week, and that probably keeps the floor decent. But similar to Bucky Irving, I probably don't expect a touchdown against Miami. So I'd rather just consider him a flex play. If you could bench him at some point, I think he probably does burn you. But based on recent history, at this point, it would be unwise to bet against. So at RB22, I think you could rank him higher, but I showed you that graph earlier on. I really think that RBs like 14 through 25 are all in the same tier, giving you roughly like 11 to 13 points this week. That's my projection for Rhamondre, roughly 12. At 23, I have DeAndre Swift versus the Vikings. And Swift, his last 4 games, has fallen off a little bit as the Bears offense has really fallen off as well. Swift is not quite the same player as he was before the bye. He was like a top 5 running back at one point, and that is definitely not the case anymore. He's RB18, though. He did score a touchdown last week again, and he's still providing 13.1 points per game. But similar to Rhamondre, I don't quite trust his offense. The matchup against the Vikings is also terrible, bottom 6 in the NFL. The Vikings only give up 16.2 points per game, 74 yards per game on the ground on 3.7 yards per carry, 3 touchdowns to the position the last 5 weeks. So Swift definitely needs to find the end zone to pay off. I don't quite trust it. I do think the Brian Flores defense really clamps down in division. I could see less than 10 points on the scoreboard from the Bears. They also lost last week on the final play. Maybe it's not as deflating as that Commanders Hail Mary loss, but still they lost to the Packers again. I don't know if the vibes are the best in Chicago right now. So I'm a bit concerned. Their O-line is always a red flag, but against the Vikings in his career, Swift is actually really good. His last 5 games are all with different teams, but he does average 14.2 points per game and usually scores a touchdown. He has 3 touchdowns in his last 5 games versus the Vikings. But obviously with the Eagles and Detroit, completely different equation. I don't buy into the numbers too much. So ranking him at 23, I think he's just a flex play this week. Not super excited, but given the state of the position, I think odds are, even in a bad matchup, you're starting him. But that's why he's not top 20. The matchup does scare me. At 24, I have Javonte Williams at Las Vegas, and I actually kind of want to rank Javonte much higher because in his last 3 games versus the Raiders with Sean Payton as head coach, Javonte plays very well. An average of 12.8 points per game, 17 touches, 5.3 catches, 81 yards, and a touchdown. If we look at earlier this year with Bo Nix at quarterback, he also put up 12.5 points. 18 touches, 5 catches, 101 total yards, no touchdown against Las Vegas in week 5. Javonte really steps up in this matchup, and the Raiders don't scare you at all, so I do think Javonte has a very high floor this week, but in general, he's not that safe to score a touchdown. In that game, he got vultured by Jaleel McLaughlin. Estime was inactive, and now Estime's a legit factor in this backfield as well. I really worry about predicting touchdowns for Denver, but I really trust the floor for Javonte this week. I think he is a safe start. I think he should go over 10 fantasy points. That's what he always does against the Raiders with Peyton as his coach. So I would start him at number 24. I think he is a very safe flex play. I think he's good for at least 11 points against Las Vegas. At running back 25, I kind of wanted to rank Austin Ekeler a bit higher because the matchup against Dallas is elite. It does rank top 3 against the position, and a lot of that damage comes on the ground. He's more involved in the passing game. We saw him put up over 80 yards receiving last week against Philly. So he's been great, really stepping up. As Brian Robinson is not fully healthy as well, I still expect a large role for Ekeler this season. He no longer looks washed. I think last year's concerns about his health were a bit overblown. Now he's healthy, and he's really contributing in this offense. They have very few pass catchers other than Terry McLaurin and Zach Ertz. There's almost nobody else for Jaden Daniels to throw the ball to. So I do expect a lot of targets for him to continue. Eckler's averaging 3.5 catches over his last 4 games, and he's been very efficient. On less than 12 touches, Ekeler is averaging 72 yards along with 3 touchdowns. So that's why he's the RB15 in scoring 13.5 points per game. But 2 of those games, Brian Robinson was unavailable. That's where all of his touchdowns did happen. So if you remove it from the equation, you're getting about 9 points from Ekeler. And I think at this point, I would project less than 10 points for all of these running backs. But Ekeler has a very high floor. The matchup's excellent. And against Dallas, there's always potential to explode. So I do think Eckler's a very legit flex this week. Just like last week, he probably sees another 6+ targets out of the backfield. At number 26, I think Jaylen Warren is also a very decent flex play. He may not go over 10 points, but I do trust him for at least 8. He has a fumble in his last 4 games, but an average of 7.8 points per game. And if he did not fumble on the goal line, he would have scored a touchdown. These numbers would look way, way better if that didn't happen. But obviously, it's coulda, shoulda, woulda, doesn't count. And that's why I do only view him in the flex conversation. Behind Ekeler, I still think the ceiling is capped. It's a timeshare, definitely a committee with Najee Harris. On Thursday night, though, maybe it's more of a 50-50 split. And who knows, the touchdown might go in favor of Warren. The Browns are a average matchup, so no upgrade or downgrade. But in 4 career games against the Browns, Jaylen Warren does average 10.6 points per game. Not that much volume, only 9 touches per game, 2.8 catches and 77 yards per game. That's really efficient. Just like Ekeler, I do think he can go over 70 yards from scrimmage pretty easily in this matchup. So love Jaylen Warren's floor this week. I'm a bit worried about the touchdown hitting, but even if it doesn't, I think he's good for at least 8 points. As someone who acquired Jaylen Warren on multiple teams over the last several weeks, I think he's going to be a very safe flex play rest of season. I trust him for at least 8 points. If he ever finds the end zone, he probably goes over 16. So high upside, but safer floor. The upside probably doesn't hit and that's why I only rank him at 26. I'd still rather go with Najee Harris by a decent margin. But at 26, I think you could still start Warren this week and feel pretty safe about his chances. At number 27, I think now is the cutoff point. I'd much rather bench these players, and I do not project more than 9 points the rest of the way. At 27, we have Rico Dowdle at the Commanders, who last season he was the clear backup behind Pollard, and in limited volume, only 8 touches per game, he was actually very efficient against the Commanders. 63 yards per game and a touchdown, 10.3 points per game. But obviously, it's not like destined to repeat. I wouldn't feel too great about his chances in general. So I don't think I trust Dowdle this week with the Cooper Rush offense in Dallas. All the upside is gone, and I really don't trust Dowdle's workload at all. The Commanders are a top 11 matchup, though. They allow 5.3 yards per carry and 6 touchdowns to the position over the last 5 games on 128 rushing yards. You would think Dowdle could play well, but I really worry about his touchdown odds in this game. With Dan Quinn off a bye against his former team on the opposite side, I really have a lot of concerns for this matchup. I think it's a major red flag. This offense probably only scores 1 touchdown. It probably doesn't go to Dowdle. And unless you get a lot of garbage time looks, I really doubt Dowdle does much. So I'd rather bench him than start him this week. At 27, I think you could definitely do worse, but I don't trust him to go over 10 points. I'd rather avoid Rico Dowdle, but he's probably good for like 8. You won't get burned if you start him. You're also not going to get completely burned with Tony Pollard if you start him, but the timeshare with Tyjae is concerning. These numbers over the last 4 games do not paint the right picture. An average of 19.5 touches is not accurate. The last 2 weeks with Tyjae, that number has fallen to only 12 touches per game, and both weeks only 9 rush attempts and about 3 targets per game. So not excited for Pollard at all. Against the Texans, it's a bottom 10 matchup as well. The Texans only give up 85 rushing yards per game on 4.3 yards per carry. And if Pollard doesn't find the end zone, I'd be very concerned. So not excited. However, if you look at 2 years ago with the Cowboys, Pollard dominated Tennessee. He had 2 touchdowns on 14 touches, but obviously that was with a different organization altogether. So not reading into these numbers, but I do want to show you them. Maybe I am wrong. Maybe Pollard does dominate. Maybe that's the reason why they targeted him in free agency. But I'd be worried. I don't trust Pollard at all. I really have a hard time believing that the volume favors him with Tyjae stepping up. So that 1A, 1B split they mentioned in the offseason appears to actually be the case. Maybe Tyjae's never really been 100% this year until the last 2 games where he has been way more involved in the offense. So very concerned with Pollard, not a safe play at all anymore. At 29, I have Kareem Hunt at Carolina, and even if Pacheco starts, I still think Hunt is in the flex conversation. I'd rather bench him. I'd be worried about the volume, but against the Panthers, it is the best matchup you can ask for. So running backs do dominate the Panthers, and in garbage time, you'd expect them to maybe bench Pacheco to keep him healthy. I still think Hunt will be involved this week. So maybe he doesn't see the 21 touches that he's gotten the last 4 games, but even if he gets like 8 or 10, I could see like 50 yards and a touchdown for Hunt against the Panthers. It's definitely a great matchup to exploit. So if we're going to start anyone's backup this week, it would be the best matchup you could find. And this week that does land on the Chiefs. Kareem Hunt with Pacheco not 100%, I still think is a top 30 play, but you're really hoping that Pacheco doesn't get activated if you've been relying on Hunt since week 3. So good luck here, but I don't think he's the safest start. With Pacheco probably going to play, you're just hoping for upside with the matchup. At 30, I think I'm benching Nick Chubb. He had a top 5 matchup last week and did nothing with it. I don't think he's the same player anymore. So it might be his last season in the NFL. At least with Cleveland, they might cut him after this season. He's just not really offering much production. So these stats against the Steelers are kind of sad to look at because he was so good before the injury, and we all know this injury happened against Minkah Fitzpatrick last season in week 2. So very annoying that you're not getting 13.6 points from Nick Chubb this week. That's what he's averaged against the Steelers, and he's just not the same player anymore. It's pretty sad. So this offense is much more pass heavy. They kind of have to be. The matchup against the Steelers does rank top 6 though, but last week it was top 5 as well, and he did nothing. So not expecting any touchdowns for Chubb. You really need that, but without it, you probably won't go over 6 points. He's only averaged 6.5 the last 4 games, and that does include a touchdown, he has been brutal. So I don't trust him at all. The efficiency is pretty low, and the volume is less than 14 touches per game. So I think I'd rather pass on Chubb. This matchup is a bit wasted on him, like the Saints was last week. So bummer with Chubb. Play him at your own risk. I just don't trust the volume. At number 31, I have Alexander Mattison versus Denver, and starting a Raiders running back is a bit of a death sentence. So you need a lot of luck this week, and the matchup is bottom 10, so I'd rather avoid it. The Broncos held Mattison to only 7.1 points in week 5, 61 yards, 2 catches, 17 touches, but no touchdowns. The touchdown went to Amir Abdullah instead. So if that happens, like last week, Amir Abdullah scored as well, then Mattison has a very capped ceiling, and in general, the floor is not that high. So I'd be concerned Jahmyr White's involved as well. I have no idea what the touch split accurately will be in Las Vegas. I'm going to pass against the Broncos. At 32, I have Cam Akers at Chicago, who did score a touchdown last week. Shockingly, he was better than even like Derrick Henry. He had like 10.6 points last week, but I really doubt that repeats. The Vikings rarely score running back touchdowns with Kevin O'Connell as the coach. So felt like a fluke. I still think Aaron Jones is the guy to trust, but obviously his role has been increasing the last 4 games. Akers averages 8.5 touches per game. That's pretty impressive given how other teams have wanted to give up on him in the past. Like the Rams basically cut him. They had no interest at all. They sent him away pretty quickly. The Texans, once Mixon was healthy, were happy to get rid of him as well. They traded him back to Minnesota, and it feels like O'Connell is the only coach that really values Cam Akers. But if he scores again, I think he'll be a legit flex conversation. I view him basically in the same vein as Raheem Mostert, who I rank 1 spot higher. You're hoping for a vulture touchdown from Akers. It is possible against the Bears. It wouldn't shock me if it happened again. Aaron Jones might not be fully healthy. At 33, though, like I mentioned in the same tier, I have Raheem Mostert versus the Patriots, who is questionable, not a guarantee to play, but he did come back on the field after exiting last week. But if he's not 100%, maybe they give more volume to Jaylen Warren. At this point, it's so touchdown dependent. I'm definitely benching them. I have no faith that Mostert is actually a good start given his injury concerns. At 34, also just praying for a touchdown with Roschon Johnson versus the Vikings, but he does have a very legit role in that department. It's not just DeAndre Swift. When they get on the goal line, they bring in Roschon quite a lot. So not the worst flyer if you're desperate. He's just hoping for a touchdown, and that's the name of the game at this point. But you know who's actually been very involved a bit more lately in this offense? Trey Benson of the Arizona Cardinals. Both him and Amari DiMercado have been getting looks alongside James Conner. So Conner's not going anywhere, but they just run the ball so much there is enough volume to go around. And off the bye, there's a chance that this rookie gets even more ingrained in the offensive game plan. So while I do definitely love this matchup for Conner, I still see some upside for Benson, and a role for him. He does average 5.7 points per game over his last 4, and that does include 38 yards per game and a touchdown. Benson is not half bad. At 36, I think Audric Estime has some upside this week. He did not play week 5 versus the Raiders, but in that game, Javonte Williams went over 100 total yards, and Jaleel McLaughlin also scored a receiving touchdown. So given his role, he's a bit more involved lately than Jaleel. I could see that touchdown go his way. There is some vulture upside for Estime this week, who has been a bit more involved lately. We saw 14 touches for him 2 weeks ago against the Chiefs, but then it fell back down to earth. They did favor Javonte again last week. So I'm not expecting him to be better than Javonte, but I also think Javonte's a decent start this week. The Raiders are a good matchup here for Denver. At 37 is where I rank Jonathan Brooks versus the Chiefs, who is questionable, not a guarantee to play, but according to reports, he should make his NFL debut this week off the bye. They activated an off IR for that Germany game, but he didn't play, and there's a chance he still remains inactive. But with Miles Sanders doubtful, I do trust Brooks to get some touches. Sanders was averaging 3 points per game his last 4, though. You need a touchdown with Brooks for it to pay off, but he's very talented. He was a second-round pick, the number 1 running back drafted this season, and if he's healthy, I see a lot of upside for him, but maybe it never happens this season. They might wait until next year to really get him going. Chuba Hubbard looks fine. At 38, I have Jerome Ford versus the Steelers, and the Pittsburgh matchup is top 6, so maybe he can capitalize if Nick Chubb doesn't. They also give up 5.2 catches for 42 yards per game, and that's what Ford offers a role in the passing game, not much else. So very touchdown dependent. I'd much rather bench him. If you have the chance to go with Brooks or Estime, or even Trey Benson over Jerome Ford, I would gladly take that opportunity. At 39, I got Zach Charbonnet versus Arizona, who did have 60 yards in his only game against Arizona last season. 7 points would be nice. I doubt it repeats, though. Charbonnet, a bit of a liability. But at number 40, I got Justice Hill at the Chargers, who sometimes catches a lot of passes. That's what you're hoping for from Justice. But these last 10, I will just mention. If you're super desperate, there's 6 teams on bye, maybe you're forced to pick one of these guys up. But Emmanuel Wilson at 41, I think will remain the backup for Jacobs. It looks like Marshawn Lloyd still not quite ready this week. At 42, I have Tyjae Spears, who has been stepping up. It could pivot back to Pollard, and the matchup's not good, so I'd rather avoid it. But maybe Tyjae is decent. He's averaging 5.5 points per game the last 4. Emari Demercado, like I mentioned with Trey Benson, is involved. He's averaging 4.7 points per game the last 4 weeks with a touchdown, just like Trey Benson. Maybe it happens for Demercado. But at 44, I have Jaleel McLaughlin at the Raiders, and he did score a touchdown in week 5. That's what you're hoping for, but Estime appears to have stolen his role. At 45, I have Amir Abdullah versus Denver, who also scored a touchdown back in week 5, but really unlikely that happens. Abdullah, though, did score last week. I'd rather go Abdullah than Jahmyr White. Maybe he's even more valuable than Mattison. At 36, Ezekiel Elliott, Devin Singletary, Jordan Mason, Gus Edwards, and Blake Corum. They're all averaging between 2 and 3.5 points per game. That's kind of the best case scenario. Without a touchdown, don't expect more than 3 points. So those are my running back rankings this week. The video went a bit long, so let's try and wrap this up quickly. This week, I would expect about 20 plus points from the top 5 players. I would expect at least 16 points from the top 10. And then I think CMC all the way through literally Javonte Williams, I think will all average somewhere between 14 to 11 points this week. I think you're getting a very flat tier from McCaffrey to Javonte. They're all RB2s, in my opinion. If you have them, even if the matchup's bad, I think you have to start them. But Ekeler and Jaylen Warren, Rico Dowdle, and Tony Pollard are really the only flex plays I'm interested in this week. I would expect somewhere between 8 and 10 points from those guys. Not much else without a touchdown. So those are the players I'm starting, and starting with Nick Chubb, Kareem Hunt, I think that's where I'm definitely benching these players. I'd be very concerned without a touchdown. I wouldn't expect more than 6 points from most of them. So I think if you can, given the nature of the week with all the buys, if you hit running back 27 and you have a top 30 wide receiver, I'd rather pivot to that safety. I think it's a much better option to go with the top 30, 35 receiver than a running back outside the top 27. So good luck to you. I hope you win this week. If you still have any questions, let me know in the comment section down below. I'll see you next time. My name's Adam Riancho. Thank you for watching. Nice and blunt.